thanks very much for talking to Dwell Time today. Please can you introduce your name and how we met at Hoot?
My name's Mary, and I met at Hoot because Dwell were doing a workshop which was going to be functioning in our sanctuary space time, and we were read out a list of, I think, half a dozen different workshops which could be provided, and we voted on them, and we voted for the bottle and the collage one.
How did you find that experience with the workshop?
I found it amazing, actually. I've looked at complex grief and complex grief reactions and therapy, and read about art therapy and how it should help. And although I've kind of pursued my creative side over the last number of years, I've always done it in an extremely guarded fashion, and from behind a fence, if you like. And this was the first time I've actually let myself go with the expectation, which was to just open the magazine and take the words that, for whatever reasons, or just take the words that appealed. And I did that in the context of losing my son 16 years ago. And I just picked out the words that, for some reason, without too much thought, came to me and put them together. Normally I would analyse why I picked them. I would think about the implications. I would think, but I didn't. I just did it straight away that way, and produced 2 pages of work which made me feel a lot better, as if I was almost like peeking me through a link in the fence, you know.
That's really good to hear. Is there anything that you would like to share about the loss of your son 16 years ago? Is that something you're able to talk about now?
Well, I guess in the end, nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. Nobody thinks it's going to happen to them, ever. And part of the result of that, partly the result of that, is that nobody then knows what to say to you when it does happen to you. Because there is nothing to say. There is nothing to say that's going to make it all right. So you become trapped in this web of responding to how the other person's feeling, and they're feeling embarrassed or difficult, and then you try and make them feel better, and in the end you're almost comforting the other person. And actually you just want to say, the best advice I can give is to, if you have somebody in that situation, is to say, look, I just don't know what to say to you, but I'm here. I have no words for you, but I am here for you. Because the cliches become so cliched. He's at peace now, it's what he wanted, and you just get so angry and bitter hearing it. Yeah, again, it might have been what he wanted, it wasn't what I wanted. And I want him back. And this is all kept behind those fences. And I can smile and say, yes, but it's all still there, and it will be forever. It's 16 years now, and I know I'll feel this way till the day I die. And nobody can change that for me. But I would like to feel less concerned about how uncomfortable the people around me are feeling. Or people judging me, thinking, what kind of mother were you? How could that happen? How could you not know, people say. How could you not? Because the person involved had mental health problems and didn't want us to know. That's how. Didn't want us to know. That was the last thing.
Would you like to talk a little bit more about the impact the death of your son has had on your life in the last 16 years?
I think the first few years I was in some kind of shock. I can remember at various points thinking, wait a minute, he's not coming back, which sounds unbelievable really after months and months, but I do remember clearly thinking, wait a minute, he's really not coming back. And I guess I went through, and still do, various stages of anger and not ever at him, mostly at the world. I was working as a nurse at the time, and without wanting to sound too holier than thou, it is more of a job that you can't just do. You have to have give some part of you, and I just didn't have anything to give anybody else. I have read that grief can make you very selfish, and I think it did, and it made me very cross, and I had nothing to give in my job anymore, and it's not the kind of job you can do as if you're standing behind a supermarket till and just get on with it. So I retired early. And obviously, I guess that in itself has a big impact in your life, obviously. I think a lot of it is people's reactions, and for me, I know people deal with it in different ways, and maybe I should have been one of these people that joined a help support organisation and put my little 2 penny worth in, but I didn't. I just took it all beside into me, and I don't know what to do with it to this day. I don't know what to do with it.
Are any of the groups that you attend at the moment helping process that grief to any degree?
Well, I think, like I say, your session helped me kind of, because I saw your, on the website I was reading about, and I thought, okay, I've been hiding and fighting and avoiding this for so long, I need to just let myself do something. But of course, I think it does help, because I've done a lot of the crafty type things with, some of the sport organisations, and basically what they do is they fill your time, so you're concentrating on something else, and you look up and some hours have gone, and there are hours that you weren't poring over things. So yes, they do help.
And we mentioned before the interview the role of peer support, so talking to people who've been through similar. Does
Absolutely. From the beginning, we've relied heavily on SOBs and to a large extent the Samaritans. But survivors of bereavement and suicide, in those early days when you can't believe what has happened, to be able to pick up the phone to somebody who, it happened to them too, is hugely powerful, because immediately you haven't got that barrier of embarrassment or there, but for the grace of God, or oh, is this catching, or oh, people who have lost somebody close to them are less likely to say something crass and unfeeling. So you feel in those groups more supported, because nobody's going to say something silly and foolish without thinking. And believe me, I've had plenty of those occasions when people have said extremely hurtful things without a thought. Probably because they don't want to think, which is fine. I guess I would have been like that in the past.
Do you want to talk about the hurtful thing?
I'd had when it was actually after my daughter graduated, and my son, I was going back with my son to his flat, and we went back on the train. My son died on the train line. That had been a good evening, and we went down to get the train, and when we sat on the train there came an announcement that said there's been a fatality on the line, and I could vaguely hear people muttering, and I literally howled for 10 minutes because it was still only a few years since, and I just literally cried and cried and cried out loud, and my son just let me. Because actually hear anybody say anything, I know anecdotally that's what people say, foolish things when that happens, and you just think, can nobody stop and think that that's somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's father, perhaps, I think that probably had a profound experience on me, in as much as I'm not telling you how I feel.
So when the trains are delayed, it would certainly be more helpful for you not to hear the reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because first of all, it brings everything back, but it's awful to think that somebody else is going to have the door knocked, like people just to be able to think outside the box, outside their little immediate next few minutes of getting somewhere. That might be a person in their life. You know, people are so selfish and think that the world is, you know, for their convenience or inconvenience. It was nothing to do with them. It was due to an awful lot of pain and suffering.
If I could take you back to when you said you took early retirement, was your employer during that time, would you say they were supportive to what you needed?
No. Again, admittedly, things are slightly better now, 16 years ago, and one would also think that people who care for others physically, i.e. nurses, are able to care for their own, but it was just the same thing. People just didn't know what to say to me, they didn't know how to be with me, they didn't know how to deal with me. Whether to bring it up, whether not to bring it up. I think looking back, if people had been braver and if somebody had said, look, you're in a really tough area of nursing, this is, you know, sad and, you know, emotional, and maybe if you could, you know, take a sideways step, go and work in theatre where you don't see an awake patient, you know. But I think nobody had the guts to say, actually, do you know what, you could still be a nurse, but don't be that sort of nurse. But hey, it doesn't matter, you know. But I think if people were more open, you know, that would have come up. But hindsight, you know.
So more honest and open conversations is what's necessary?
Yes. You know, people did say, oh, you know, how are you going to manage money? Well, that wasn't really the issue, actually, as it happens. You know, it was more about, well, what's the point of you now? If you're not a mother and you're not a nurse, who are you?
How did you find the identity that you have now? What process did you...
Oh, well, actually, to be fair, to be absolutely honest, I lacked another identity that came my way, which was daughter of a mother with dementia who was very old. And, you know, quite a bright little assertive spark in that role, because you know, I knew the background to the National Health Service, I knew how the system worked. I was able to stand up and fight for my mother's corner, and I was very lucky. My mother and I developed a very, very different relationship in her last few years, and for 3 years of weekends I was the daughter going to see her mum, and of course she died, so I'm just this person who goes to groups in her school.
You're an artist, that's an important role, and you're telling your story now, which is an important role. We mentioned before the interview about the gender divide, of how men and women talk about emotions differently and about grief differently. Is there anything that you want to mention about that? Is that something that have you got any thoughts on?
I guess I was married to somebody who was a traditional Dower Scot, who emotions weren't talked about, and I guess that would have possibly be influential, but to be honest, I don't think a huge amount. I don't think a huge amount, really. I think to a large extent, as I say, 16 years ago, in many respects, some things have changed. And also the persons within, you know, if it's a kind of very a culture where people don't talk about feelings, and, you know, I think it's going to take a long time to change society. People are always saying how wonderful it is now, but these are surface level changes. It's going to take a long time before men are able to say, you know what, I probably do need some help. And when people don't need help, won't accept help, won't acknowledge they need help, you can't help them.
Okay, to continue.
Yeah.
What would you say to anyone else who is currently going through a situation similar to yourselves right now?
Similar to me right now, or similar to me in the early days?
16 years ago, but also now, because you're still dealing with it now, of course.
16 years ago, I'd say talk to SOBS, talk to somebody. There are people out there who this has happened to as well, and also, you know, some of them have gone on to carry on with their lives in a productive and meaningful way. What would I say to me now? wish there was a way to remove this perception that it was 16 years ago, for goodness sake. You're not supposed to be weeping like it was yesterday. What's the matter with you? Get on with your life. Accept it.
Do you think maybe in 16 years' time you would tell yourself now that it's okay to feel this way?
It is okay to feel this way, but it's not okay to tell people or let them know. Except within a support system, as you are offering by being here today and listening. But those systems are out there. It's just quite hard to find them in some places, and it can take a long time. And you might have to try a few different kind of methods. Some people are okay to go to local support groups. Some people like to go to support groups that are far away, so they're not in the neighbourhood. Some people like to go to closed groups because they're more supportive. I found that. Some support groups are drop in, drop out, therefore you find you're telling your story all over again to somebody you haven't met before. The sort of closed support group, while it's quite intense, it is also very helpful.
How do you think it would be easier to find out about the groups that exist? Do you think some sort of local directory or signposting, what do you think would help?
I think so. I know that in Leeds they certainly did a lot more. There was booklets, saying what help there was available and things. Whereas I find in Huddersfield, that there's no, there doesn't seem to be a single, the nearest sort of subs group is Bradford or Manchester. Not that I particularly perhaps go every month, but there is a new group starting up. But again, this has been not publicised across the support services in the area, and I think it needs to be. And it all seems to keep coming back to this: we're not talking about it. Well, we do need to talk about it.
We absolutely do.
If there's one thing that you think that if you could make available right now to help people that have been through a similar situation to yourself, what would that be? What kind of organisation would you envisage?
That's a really hard question, because I think everybody's different. Everybody deals with what happens to them in different ways, and support is different for different people. And while some people might go along to a support group every month and find that really rock solid for them, I don't know, that going to something regularly like that didn't work for me. And I think you just actually have to give yourself time and space to work out how it's going to be and how you're going to be with it. It's something just open as it could be, I think.
And one thing that stands out as key for me from everything that you've said is getting things out in the open and having being able to talk about it freely.
Yes, I do think that, because although I say things have changed and things are better, if I was to meet somebody tomorrow, I would still, I am pretty certain, if I was to go into a new group tomorrow and introduce myself, and they would say, "Oh, how many children have you got?" And I'd say, "Well, I had 3 and now I've got 2. And they'd say, "Oh gosh, what happened?" And I'd say, "He took his own life." And they'd think, wait a minute, I don't know my line here. And I'd feel it, and they'd feel it, and I'd think, you know what, let it go. Let it go. But then I'm not going to say I've got 2 children. I'm not going to deny my son's life. I'm not going to do that to fit in society's conventions. This is who I am and this is who we were. And you know what, I'm sorry if you can't deal with it. And I'll step away from those situations, which is a cop-out, and I acknowledge that if I'd been a younger person, that might not be a viable thing to do. But at this point in my life, that's what I'm choosing to do. I'm going to go to places where people are less likely to judge me and less likely to be insensitive. Which just says it sound like walking on eggshells, doesn't it?
So if you're in that group scenario that you just outlined, if you're in that group scenario that you just outlined and somebody asked you those questions and you said that response, what would be, for somebody who that was a shock to them and they didn't know how to respond, what would be a good way of responding to that for you?
Just to say, honestly, I don't know what to say about that. Yes. I cannot begin to imagine how you feel. Please don't say, oh, I understand, somebody I knew did that. No, you don't understand. So don't even say that. You know, please, just... But I don't give myself the opportunity to be in that situation anymore because I've had enough of that now. If people can't accept me as I am, even if they don't see all of this on the surface, then I really don't have time for them. Which does, you know, as I say, grief has made me in lots of ways very selfish. You know, from the start, my mother died at 97. I'm not going to be sad. And somebody was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I had to say, wait a minute, just stop. My mother was 97. That's how life works. You get old, you die. That's not a tragedy. My son dying in his 30s is a tragedy. And people don't get that. Griefs are not the same. It's okay that my mum's died. I miss her, but that's all right. But it's not a tragedy or the end of the world. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for people anymore.
What's next?
Truthfully, I don't know. This is the most I've talked, I think, probably the most I've talked about it, since I can't remember when. I can't change society. I can't make everybody feel alright around this. I'm sitting here in a group of people who are okay with me being this upset. But most people aren't, so I will just, in a way, carry on living my life in the shadows. And if I could, in any way, contribute to people realising this is not an inconvenience, it's not just a selfish thing to do, it's a tragedy for everybody, whoever knew that person. And my life is richer that he was in it, the world is richer that he was in it.